Welcome, Mary. Thank you for coming to share your experience with us, and thank you for coming. So we go right into your career and your long career. You worked with Éric Rohmer for many years, and then you edit a lot of indie fiction film and feature documentaries. And so your experience been alternating with narrative films and documentaries. So, and the elements of to connect these kind of filmmaking. So can you tell us, your experience and your, what to share with young filmmakers in Hong Kong?
Yes, well, the funny thing about this is that I've worked about 25 years with Éric Rohmer doing fiction films. And then actually somebody approached me to edit a Chinese documentary film that was co-produced in France simply because I am Chinese. And at that time I had no experience whatsoever with documentary films. And since then, very quickly, actually, then I started to edit other documentary films, and then Last Train Home happened. And Last Train Home was such a popular film for many reasons that the funny thing is that nowadays, when I go somewhere, somebody would completely ignore the Éric Rohmer part, or they simply don't know who Éric Rohmer is, and would say, "Oh, you're the editor of Last Train Home." So the two parts, in fact, they don't mix.
Mm-hmm. But as a creative director, editor and director, of course, there are now, in the television stage right now, everyone look for the 3 acts, the sort of traditional way of telling a story. And I read somewhere you said your ways is different.
It's not that it's different, but I do hate the 3-act thing. Simply for the simple reason that I never knew what it was. I mean, the thing is that I think that we have to remember that I didn't come from editing or script writing background. I went to communication arts, and in fact, it's more like a visual and experimental arts kind of background. So I really, for a very long time, I didn't know what people were talking about, the 3-act thing. And so whatever that I felt instinctively was right would be the form of storytelling. And quite often, since I'm very much influenced by poetry and music, quite often I would be guided by a sort of internal music of the piece. And so whether it's 3, 4, 5 acts or whatever, it doesn't matter.
Can you elaborate a bit?
Yes, sometimes it comes with experience. You've really hit the word, but it's not necessarily experience with the technique. Quite often I would say to young students or not so young students that go and get your life experience. And that being an editor or a creative editor is very similar to being an actor. An actor, what does he work with? It's his life experience, the emotions that he feels. And if you're a creative editor, which is telling the story in a way that would move the audience, that would create a resonance and be able to communicate with the audience, if you are a blank page and you have never experienced any emotions or any drama or any pain, you wouldn't be able to do it. So I don't mean that everybody has to go out and experience some pain, but that is sort of being like living is more important than the technique, because the technique nowadays anybody can go on YouTube and the Final Cut for Dummies and stuff like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You in terms of structure of the piece, you said that you always look at the beginning, the prologue is kind of important to set the tone of the documentary or even a feature film. Can you talk about a bit more?
Yes. Well, that is like we're getting into sort of like my secrets. It's sort of there are favorite ways that I like to approach a project, and one of the ways is starting to make a prologue for the film, whether it's a documentary or fiction, because I feel that it's a key, that you're giving the audience a key to approach this story or this. Sometimes it's not something from the story. It may be a key to a mood of the film, and it may have nothing to do with the rest of the film, but I would just providing a key. And for myself, actually, it's a key for myself to, quite often when I have got the beginning or the prologue, then I know where the rest is going. Mm-hmm. So maybe we can look at something.
Shall we play the clip number 1 from Umbrella? 杜海奔 Umbrella.
Maybe I will explain it a little bit first.
Okay.
Because this was a film that was that Du Haibing had shown at the Venice Film Festival in competition for Horizonte, and then after the showing, that it was a version that nobody had seen, and that the organizers asked if I could recut the film. And quite simply, it was a film in 5 parts about the 5 layers of Chinese society. And in fact, what he wanted to say was at the very end, at the last part, and it's like an hour and a half later. So asking the audience to stay an hour and a half through a film that they couldn't figure out what was going on, is a little bit much. So one of the first things I did was a little prologue, but in his style with a fixed shot, and in fact, the theme of the film is that the Chinese rural, the peasant class, could not live with the labor anymore. So you'll see how the prologue is.
Okay.
just that, I play this because it also has a point that it goes to our next point, because it's not just about the prologue, but it's also about the choice of shots, in terms of that when even in something like this, in like 3-4 shots of the first chapter, which is about the industry, I think that you have to be very careful to choose always. Each shot should be saying something, not just random, because if you did the random shots, it would be a TV report. Whereas in this, why there was this long shot of the pan from one young worker to the end, which is this older woman, because the theme of the film is going to be that this older class of rural workers couldn't live on their land anymore. So there are shots about the older people who are left behind.
Mm-hmm. And then all the workers are very young, so the contrast, you know. I want to ask you, because there, you know, the style of European documentary, they prefer very slow and meditative, and you really, each shot people want to study and you know, want to know why is this shot here, versus the sort of the more the U.S. style. It's more like sort of I would say now it's all constructed. Mm-hmm. Well, every document is constructed, but in a way constructed more like in your face. Mm-hmm. So can you comment on the style, and is that to do something to do with the narrative Éric Rohmer style from the French style?
I think that I myself like a very poetic style. So in fact, it's quite often it's not a problem of finding a good editor for your project, but whether the director and the editor have the same vision and the same kind of preference. And I don't think that it has particularly to do with the French style, because there are also some very punchy French documentaries, but in this case, it has to do with Du Haibing's style, mm-hmm. which is always these long-held shots. But there have been other documentaries where they have been like a much more dramatic, like in terms of like Last Train Home.
Yes. You want to talk about Last Train Home?
Yes, the famous Last Train Home. Yes. So Last Train Home is also a Chinese documentary, but that they wanted, definitely it was constructed as a fiction film. When we say fiction, we are talking about drama. I mean, it's not fiction, but it's drama. And so building it as a drama is a different way of working. And I wanted to show this clip because it's really about a different style of documentary, and then I will explain what I did with it.
你说你这出来半年，你跟我搞的啥子名和名堂？
我搞的啥子？
啊？
我啥事没搞？
你只认得到钱，你认得到谁？
我不能认得一直只认钱的，我不认钱，我只认钱不认人。
真的吗？
哎。
那你跟我出去。
老子要出去。哎，你说老子。
老子哪个是老子啊？
你看呢？爸爸都敢打你看嘛？你敢？你这里会打？你敢打爸爸有理哦？你也是。
你这老生老实的。
你爸爸都敢打。
你敢老子我动。
你不过哪个面前就是老子的。
老子。哪个是老子说？你跟我说。10多年老子没收拾的。
你看嘛，爸爸都敢打。你别说啥子。
谁是老子？你说。
我说你。
谁是老子？谁是老子？
你爸爸都敢打你也是。
老子气得没法。
你以为抢妈妈面前来嘛？爸爸头我都想发火，都没给你发火。我跟你说，你还抢妈妈。
你跟我说清楚，谁是老子？你跟我说清楚。你脾气要大。你认识的我，他不是要跟认识的人嘛？那些都是认识的我，你要啷个做？啊？你说你搞的啥子名堂？我哪搞的啥子名堂？我啥子名堂都没搞。你没搞什么搞啥？你什么老子的啊？你不在爸爸。啊？你爸爸？啊？是你爸爸是老子吗？啊？你是老子吗？他给我把我记出来的，他给我把外公记事的，我哪里把外公记事的？你说清楚。外公走开。再见你都不敢在你爸爸面前老子。他管起我外公。你是老子吗？啊。我不是，但我还是在爸，我就在爸这样做。你敢吗？我哪没敢？我还是说出来了。你再弄一次。你再说吗？你再说嘛。老子。疯子的狗。
我3天半夜，我3年，我说我心里都记得清楚，我来背东西背东西回去，背东西来，我背东西回去，我说那就是背饭讨饭点儿。
哎呀，现在那个都活动，哎呀，他随便自己嘛，愿意做啥就做啥子。哎呀，我们来当父母的，孩子大的也管不到了，随便他自己愿意怎么样就怎么样，不会勉强。那就是凭他自己的本事了，哎呀，不勉强现在。
The whole story is that this Chinese workers who had to go to another place to work in factories, and they actually are away all year long, and they only go home once a year to see their children. So the children grow up with their grandmother, and then gradually, of course, they lose sight of the children. This year they come back, and the little girl has become a very troublesome adolescent. So, in fact, quite often that I work with an assembly, like an assistant editor would have made some selective scene, or the director would have made some selective scenes, and sometimes they would have made an assembly. And in terms of the assembly, this actually, the whole fight scene, it was very short. And that there was nothing, all the fight that happened afterwards was not in there, because apparently the director was worried about a question of whether, if they see him, that he didn't break up the fight, whether they would think badly of him. And my opinion is that once you've shot the thing, you filmed the thing, and then you have to take responsibility for it as long as it is in the limit of something. And so actually we negotiated, and so he went as far as that fight at the end. But in fact, he comes in at the end, but he really didn't want that. So it was a matter of negotiation. And after that, there was a long scene in the kitchen where they set up, they cooked, they set up the table, and they prepared to eat. And also there was a shot of the girl crying in the corner, which didn't belong in that scene. It was from another scene. And so basically I just cut it from the height of the fight to the table when they're all silent at the table, which is a sort of dramatic way of doing it. It's really a fiction technique.
So in a way, the editor is always negotiating and helping the director to shape the story or the storytelling part. So you have one point saying that there are 3 points you want to say in editing in the first page. Okay. So maybe you can share that with us.
I always say that I have 3 things in mind. I try to keep myself on track by keeping these 3 things. The first thing is whether I'm being clear in my communication to the audience. And in that sense, I don't mean that it has to be linear. I don't mean that I have to go and tell everything. In fact, I can lay down steps whereas I'm sort of cheating the audience in the beginning and then gradually reveal the truth, so to speak. But being clear is what is clear in my mind, because I can't approach it if I'm not clear in my mind how I want to go about it and what I want to say. The second thing is simply that every story has many ways of being told, and I just want to avoid being flat. Quite often you have all the information in a scene, but then it comes out as being informative, and that is very flat storytelling. So I try to build something that is more emotional. And simply the third thing is a flow, it's a rhythm. But that is something that that is something that you hope to achieve if it's the grace really of something.
Mm-hmm. That's probably the most difficult part. Yes. Is by the rhythm.
Even for me, it's really a thing. This is a step that I think always that there are some magical elements in the editing room that sometimes you can't control when the grace will fall from the ceiling, I think.
Yeah. And you said that, I read somewhere, you said that you work with instinct a lot.
Yes, I do work a lot with instinct. So that's one of the reasons, actually, that I can't have somebody in the editing room. I have a particular way of working, is that I don't work with the director in the editing room. And that is not because she's the director. I can't also, unfortunately, quite a lot of students have asked whether they can just sit and look. But I get very disturbed by a vibration in the room. So I have to be alone with the material. So that's what's instinctive, because in fact it is very magical. It is just it goes from one thing to another. I might, at the beginning of cutting the scene, I might not at all have the idea how it would go. It would just happen, but only if I'm alone.
I also work alone. I edit my film, and I don't totally understand. And do you have a time of the day you work?
Well, I'm a late night person. Oh. And in fact, when I work somewhere else, I always ask that. People laugh at me about this. But I always ask that the edit suite, the whole setup, be beside my bed. Simply because I love working at night, and there's a lot of technical stuff that you do, rendering and stuff. that I just want to then lie on my bed and read a book while the thing is rendering. And that I want to be able to get up in the middle of the night, and if I suddenly have a thought, and that I want to attack a sequence. But on the other hand, I must say that the energy is better in the morning. So I do my late night thing, and I look at the scene again in the morning.
Mm-hmm. And when do you show the cut to the director?
Never. No. Usually, that's another thing, is that I do not, unless it's a very experienced director, I don't, I have a rule of not sitting down and looking at the cut with the director, because it's a immediate reaction, and it is not necessarily the correct reaction, because we must remember that the director, when he or she is in the editing room, it's really the moment of great vulnerability. Mm-hmm. It's like it's a point of no return. You can't reshoot forever, and so really the editor is the only person who can save them, and so they are very panicky. Mm-hmm. So if they would react to the cut with a very with panic. And so in fact, what I would usually do is to output something, give it to them. They would look at it like carefully and several times, and get angry and get whatever, depressed, whatever, and then a few days later or whatever, then we can discuss it and change things. It changes. It is different with very experienced directors, but still, I mean that it needs time. It's like wine, it needs time to decant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. Actually, usually when people look at the cut, they just react and then say things that maybe they regret later. Usually that's the case. And so it's better for them to really watch it alone and watch it several times, and then they react. It's better.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's much better. Then they have a better idea also what they would like to have changed in the cut. Yeah.
So you, if they request tremendous changes, would you tolerate that?
I'm very open to suggestion. Nobody has ever requested tremendous changes. I think that comes back to our first, what we said before, is that you don't just take an editor because he or she has good technique. Mm. It's really a matter of marriage, and that if they chose me and I chose them, it's because there is some sort of complicity. So it doesn't go wrong very, very far. But there are moments when there are changes, and I'm always open to suggestions. And sometimes I would insist on something, but gently, because there's another thing that's very interesting, is that directors are very often self-censoring. Mm-hmm. And that, in fact, I'm quite often bringing in an element that they had omitted, or they didn't, well, in terms of Last Train Home, for example, that they didn't want to show, and they're using the editor as a shield to, okay, she made me do it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of thing. Even Éric Rohmer had this kind of a tendency.
So you want to show?
I just wanted to show a scene, very short, from a Hong Kong documentary, Flowing Stories, which is something that I helped to really write with the elements that the director gave me, which is a lot of sound, a lot of different formats of images, and so on. And so basically, it's really composing the thing with sort of experimental and poetic techniques. So this is it's a story of her native village in Saigon, and so this is a part where they talk about the memories of this river when they grew up.
以前有個擔水一喎，唔係最嗰時西衫嗰時行落去，你扶扶腳擔，照擔6擔慢擔6擔，擔水嚟嘅吃㗎，唔中意嘅水吃㗎啦。哎呦，光中意㗎，你家就話吃水喉啫嘛，嗰隻咩水啊？嗰時水啊，擔到冇得擔啊，佢到大壺口啊，10個位先擔嚟計啊。寒天一下都冇水㗎啦，係咯，仲夠擔喎。哎呀，唔會嗰條河啊，每一條河係咪啊？
嗰啲坑咧，人哋好清㗎，啲水同埋啲石好靚㗎。我哋夜晚咧，慢慢咧，我哋喺嗰度坐傾偈下，喺嗰度乜嘢都講㗎。耕田翻嚟啊，好熱嘅晏晝啊，第一時間啊，煲落嗰啲粥咧，你晏晝要擔飯過去一田俾我媽啲食㗎嘛。咁要翻嚟煮晏即係lunch嗰餐咧，臨就走落去嗰度，個河游水啊！
細佬哥不停咁喺嗰度挖石啊、捉蝦啊，喺嗰度捉魚啊！哇！嗰陣時我哋細個啊，成日捉佢賣㗎，去捉嗰啲海啲坑狗啊，都喺蠔涌上邊咧。我細個嗰陣時揾到去流水岩㗎，好多嗰啲花花魚 BB 㗎。
其實係啊，以前我哋係興唔會話黐喺屋企嘅，以前唔同而家呢啲後生靚仔靚妹黐屋企。我哋以前係通山走，唔係就去海玩，唔係就去河玩㗎啦，都係可以玩成日。係啊，好多嘢玩，唔使話電腦。其實以前我哋揸個乜咧，掟玩遊戲又可以玩成日，上山玩冰尺又可以玩成日，咁咯。不過我哋嗰時細個都可以跳水嘅喎，喺上面跳落去都好深下咯，變咗佢跳水玩啊，喺度玩。呢度可以行得過去噶嘛？以前係一條路咁行上去噶嘛，喺度洗衫啊、洗剩咁。中意捉落海啲河度捉魚啊！玩啊！捉魚玩啊！而家好難落去啊！而家喺德嗰邊落唔到啦。落唔到啊！而家。
So in fact, she liked to use motion graphics, the director. So there are quite a few scenes where she had used photographs and then had an artist made motion graphics in yeah.
And the superimposition on the evoke the memories of the past. So there's the pictures and then the flow. This is more. It's a very different style than the other style.
Very, very different. Yeah. It's very poetic.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think that I composed the film because the music really helped a lot, but we didn't have music in this clip, which was she was very, very fortunate to be working with one of the composers of Naomi Kawase, and the music really drove for sure the film, and where she also Jessie had this huge amount of footage in different forms, like in Super 8, some of it was in Super 8, photos and so on, and voices from just interviews, memories, and this backbone of the story, which is the grandmother. Because, in fact, in the beginning, she wanted to tell the story of the family who emigrated. But when I looked at the footage and I saw the grandmother, actually she was the key element, and that we both decided that we will use the grandmother as the key figure. And also that because it was a strong woman and she was very funny, you can hear her in the beginning. She's just, she sings this kind of sango and all that. So she's a funny character, yeah.
A lot of now directors call themselves a writer in documentaries, and you call yourself composer. That's great.
Yes.
So we're composing the image, composing sound.
Yes, it's like a tapestry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll talk about all the stuff, and I think that we have time for the talk about the last thing.
Okay.
It's about ethics. I mean, ethics in documentary filmmaking is so
it's
important.
Very important.
Yeah.
I think that when we talk about ethics, there are two things. One is almost also like what we saw in Last Train Home in terms of, I think everybody has a different standard of ethics, and that where the limit is and how far we can go. First of all, I think that one of the things that we have to remember is that the director is going to have to live with his or her film forever. So there is a line where I can't push too much, like, you know, when Li Xingfan didn't want to cross that line, I can't really push him to be in the picture in a scene that he doesn't feel comfortable with. The other thing is perhaps like I would not agree with a scene that I feel is hurting the person that is being interviewed, or sort of being too manipulative. All documentaries are manipulative, but being overtly manipulative to hurt, that I don't agree with. It's actually also sometimes a technique of a filmmaker who want to suddenly like pretend that there's nobody, that it's like a scene that is like shot naturally and nobody is in the room, whereas in this case I cut it differently so that we would be aware of a presence of the camera in the room, and that is actually being addressed, this kind of thing.
I'm just wondering, do you leave any room for accident in the way that you work? Do you cultivate it, or do you work in a way that takes advantage of it? Accident, coincidence?
Yes. Well, another clip that I did prepare that we don't have time to show is about, actually it's very interesting because it is a fiction film, a drama film, but that the director has been a documentary filmmaker mostly, and that it is a story of an actress, of a woman who goes from Istanbul, it's a Turkish film, from Istanbul to Iraq to look for her lover. And it's a true story of this woman's story, but that 2 years later they reenacted it as a drama. But when they were doing it, when they were shooting it, which is a complete drama, I mean it's just fiction, they come to a village where there is actually a Kurdish village, and there's actually a wedding going on. And the actress just couldn't resist. She just jumped from the car and she started dancing with the whole group. And so it built up to a beautiful scene. That's just a kind of accident. That's always like and not only is it just a beautiful scene, but that the whole point is that these Kurdish villages in the east of Turkey were very, very much controlled or looked at or really oppressed by the Turkish military. And in fact, there's a scene when they are dancing, and one of the men just pointed like that, and there's just one shot of a car, a military truck, that is like hovering around. And so in terms of an accident, it actually then showed us what the situation was, what they were going through.
How did your idea of the prologue develop? Was that something that just formed when you were working in France, or was that something that you came across some hurdles when you were editing and you realized this was one of your keys to get you released to edit the rest of the film?
But that's basically what I mean by having magic dust that drop from the ceiling. It's something. It's a sort of an accident. It's like I may know that I want to make a prologue, but I may not know at all how to go about it, and that it would just happen gradually. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's very mysterious. It is the editing process is, as you know, very mysterious, and you don't know where it comes from. Yeah.
Sometimes for me, it's like going swimming, and then we get a lot of inspiration.
Yeah. Yes.
Right, maybe going yoga or dancing.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sometimes you look at a piece of painting, you get inspiration.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why just now I was talking with some students that They were saying, how do you improve your technique? One of the things I say is that first of all, you never stop improving yourself. I mean, that's not a matter of improving your technique, but it's a matter of never stopping to be curious about or to improve your life resources. Look at paintings, read poetry. I mean, read is very important. Nobody reads anymore, but it's very important. Listen to music is extremely important. Listen to sounds, listen to birds, listen to the sea. And I think that every time I go somewhere, I listen to the sounds a lot. And that's very, very inspiring.
其实我看的这个电影就是刚才Mary Stephen 提到的这个我的马龙与白兰度后面的这个戏，这个戏最后面的一段是一个很长的，我发觉它简洁的，是很有它的用意在的，它可以去诠释一下嘛，那个电影最后的一部分，它是故意把这个片段弄得很长。以前它是这个镜头是比较灵活的，那最后这个女主角在 the main character, that lady waiting for the reunion of her boyfriend. That can you tell me something about the 这用意还是这个你怎么去想这个还是简洁的还是导演的方面的事情
Well, in fact, the lady is talking about the same film that I was talking about, this Turkish film, and apparently that you have seen it. It's at the very end. This lady, this woman is waiting at the border. Her lover is supposed to come and meet her, and she's just waiting. In fact, he would never come because I'm not going to do any spoiler, but. And so the way that it was done is really to stretch the time. I mean, quite simply the whole act of waiting, and in fact there was a moment when she gets up, she expects to see him coming, and in fact it's two other guys coming, and so it's all really cheating the audience. It's really building the time so that stretching the time so that we feel that she's waiting, so that when we stretch to a certain time, emotionally we would break, so that we break with her, which is a little bit the technique of the Last Train Home, of the fight and then coming back to this scene, very quiet scene around the table and seeing everybody, because in fact the real scene would be 2 seconds, but it's stretching the time of everybody's reaction and emotions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.